Oh, well, hello there. Welcome back. Let's continue our discussion on religion. We're going to speak about globalization and religion and kind of how these are interrelated and what's happening as people are moving from one place to another and what kind of an impact is that having. Um, as globalism takes more and more effect, it means that communication and people are going to move more often, right? And it's going to be easier for them to move. And so those ideas and folks travel at a faster rate, and people have a greater access to new ideas. So if people are immigrating someplace, right? So say they're moving from Guatemala to Chicago, okay? They are going to be taking their religious practices, their ideologies, and they're going to move to a new place. Oftentimes, when they do this, they are bringing with them their religion, they're bringing with them family, but they're oftentimes moving to a new location um, and creating a new sort of subculture there, right? Now, this is where we see certain like immigration patterns where people will move to different cities because there's already been an established community built there, and it creates a conduit between this community and another community. So you take your religion with you, but when you get to that new location, you're also going to be oftentimes um, you're going to experience other religions. And while you might practice the one that you brought with you, your children, if they're exposed to other religions, have a greater chance of either changing religion or adapting to a new one, right? So we see that as immigration is taking place, um, oftentimes to wherever that is that you end up moving to, uh, you can do one of a couple things. Sometimes you can create a new space there for that practice. If you can build community there, if enough people move from this one town to another place, you can create that sort of microculture, and you can maintain a lot of that cultural identity. Not that it won't be changed, because of course it will be, but you can still sort of maintain, and in some cases, even revitalize certain communities if you have enough people move there and engage in those practices. But there's oftentimes an element of change, which is usually going to take place. Um, I've already talked a little bit about how people can move, especially when it comes to like our discussion with about Durkheim. That concern of moving from your traditional home to a location that doesn't have that shared ideology, that shared religion. Um, a lot of times you might be able to maintain that practice and that belief, but subsequent generations are likely going to be impacted by that larger community. It can change politics and how people might react to certain circumstances. For example, um, during the 2016 election, okay, there was a real interesting thing that took place. If we look at Los Angeles and what was happening there during the election cycle, we saw that a lot of people were projecting, because at the same time they were voting not only for Obama to become president in this very liberal democratic area, but they were also looking at LGBTQ rights, and especially when it came to marriage. And as they were looking at LA, they figured that the predominant amount of people were going to vote for Obama, and that it also meant that LGBTQ rights were going to be, sort of tagged on to his train, right? And what ended up happening was slightly different. So because of there's a lot of immigration that took place in Los Angeles, coming from not only Mexico but from other Central and South American countries, that a very strong element of Catholic beliefs. Now, these were liberal beliefs when it came to like American politics, but conservative beliefs when it came to ideas of marriage and practices of gender and sexuality. So while those counties went for Obama when it came to voting, they struck down these measures that would have allowed for LGBTQ members to get married. And a lot of people weren't expecting that. They weren't taking into account that while some of these sort of liberal ideologies matched what was happening within that community, there were others that weren't. And so those politics are a lot more dynamic when it comes to how people are moving from place to place, right? They might bring certain ideologies with them that might not always work with pre-established ideologies and peoples that live there. Um, so, when we think about how people are moving and where they're moving to, again, it makes a big difference how many people might move there. If you're just talking about individuals, probably not a big change. But if you create a conduit, right? Somebody moves there, starts a business, right? Somebody's moving from Guatemala to Chicago. In Chicago, they're able to start a good business, and they allow other people to move there and work for that business. And that business gets bigger and starts a community, and that community builds a church. And that church helps to organize people coming from that community and moving to Chicago. And then that creates a new pocket influence, right? And we've seen this throughout American history as people have immigrated from other countries, whether or not they are European countries or South American or Central American communities, and then also taking into account slavery as well. And slavery is a lot different because a lot of that cultural history and languages were intentionally and purposefully and um, executed in a way that kept power over those individuals, right? And to do that, you eliminate that religion, you eliminate that language, and give them something else to deal with, right? Um, and so, right, if you can control those religion and that influence, you can control that community. And so there's a lot of power when it comes to, again, that cultural heritage, whether or not you can maintain it. And this is something that we can look at, Native Americans and their experience as well. And in fact, most indigenous communities that have had some sort of oppression put upon them, whether it's in North America or in Asia or in Africa or in India, all of these places have had some sort of impact on traditional indigenous peoples and the desire to change them, right? To fit what is considered to be the mainstream. So, right, there's a lot of power that can go into that. Let's talk about religion and ideology. This is sort of branching off of some of the stuff that we just talked about. Ideology is, again, connected to ideals, right? And ideals being those really important aspects of our culture, which are difficult to change, creates that ideology, right? And if we look at people within even our own culture, right? And you hear them say, I'm a Christian first and an American second, Right. Well, they're telling you exactly who they are when it comes to the things that they find important. Their connection to their religious experience is more important than the ideals that have been established by the United States and their country. Now, again, not placing judgment or anything like that on this, um, but it helps us to understand motivation. If presented with a choice of doing this or doing that, this person might choose to do this because it more closely aligns to their religious ideology versus doing that, which might more closely relate to their country's ideology. Right? So if we understand that there can be those connections between that religious ideology and their sense of um, nationhood, right? There can be a big difference. This ideology, this influence, um, can have an impact on how they behave on an everyday basis, right? What are their activities? How do they spend their money? Uh, I had a great aunt who gave 50% of her income to her church, right? Her tithings to her church were very significant, and she believed that if she gave the church as much money as she possibly could and still survive, that was going to not only benefit her community, but that was going to get her into heaven. That was part of the deal, right? That she would be able to pay to get in, and so that shows you that where other Americans might say, okay, I'm going to spend you know 30% of my income on buying a house and maintaining that house, and then I'm going to have a bunch of kids or a couple of kids or one kid, and that's a certain amount of my money is going to go towards rearing children and education, and then having that good life. How much are you going to fit that sort of religious practice and what you can contribute to it versus all the other things that come with your culture and community? So, how much, right? How much are you going to put into it? Some people are going to go all in, other people, not so much. Maybe they go to church once a week and that's enough, right? They go in, they sit in mass, listen to their preacher, say their prayers, head out, go get brunch, go home, watch the football game, right? That is one way that people will express their connection to their religion, and the rest of the week they do whatever they're going to do. So we want to pay attention to that sort of connection of the levels of religious practice and how they relate to those ideologies. Um, I think it's also important, and again, we've sort of talked a little bit about this, but having that reflective thought as researchers is how much does studying a religion um, impact yourself, right? Uh, and a lot of us come and have a religious background. I myself started out in my youth as a Lutheran because most of my family was Lutheran, and then I became, when I was a teenager, an atheist, and then as an adult, I became agnostic. How does that belief, how does that series of events impact me as a researcher when I look at another culture that is dealing with religion? How does that impact how I see other Lutherans or the Catholic Church or Baptists or folks that are practicing some sort of indigenous shamanistic practice, or Buddhists or Taoists or someone that's doing the Shinto religion, right? How does my experience going to influence my research, right? I already know that I have bias, right? That is one of the important things that we have to sort of remind ourselves, is that we come from a culture. We come from this experience of being in the United States and learning these rules and all the values that come along with them. That will have influence on how we do research. Recognizing that is just as important as going out and doing the research that you're going to do. Because recognizing that is saying that I know that there are things that I have ideas about, and some of those ideas are going to have moral and ethical connections to whether it's right or wrong. If I understand that, then I can look at another culture and try and do it through those unbiased eyes, which is difficult and rarely ever done. But we can acknowledge that that is a reality. Okay, moving on from there. Different types of religions. We've talked a little bit about all of these, right? Animism, this aspect of attributing souls or deities or other supernatural aspects to the natural world, whether it's through animals and plants, and mountains, rivers, right? Thinking about the Disney cartoon Moana, right, and having spirits that are connected to the ocean, connected to mountains, and how they might be connected to our religious practices. Right? Those are things that a lot of people are attached to, right? We look at water. You look at like the Ganges River in India. The Ganges is one of those spiritual rivers that, life comes from. And people are cremated and spread or buried in the river itself because it is so spiritual. And so there's a lot of connection that goes to it. And it's oftentimes because those rivers mean life, right? You get your water from there. You can get food from there. It sustains you. It's powerful. It's got all of those things. So you might find that spiritual connection with it. Then you have the polytheism. You might have that pantheon of gods, whether or not it's the Greek pantheon, the Viking pantheon, any of those that have multiple gods attached to it. There are some scholars that talk about how even Catholicism acts more like a pantheon, than it does a monotheistic religion. And that's partially because of the fact that it has extra deities. You have God, but then you have the angels, right? And even God itself is sort of broken up into three, right? You have the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Those three different aspects of God could be seen as three different gods, depending on how you look at it, or want to argue about it for that matter. So we see that polytheism has a tendency to, take on different aspects, and oftentimes the gods that are a part of a polytheistic are oftentimes very humanized, right? When we think about monotheistic gods, if we go with the big G God here, in any of the Judeo-Christian Islamic religions, we see this omnipotent, all-powerful, all-knowing entity, which creates this interesting relationship between God and the practitioners. In polytheistic religions, oftentimes you see a very humanistic approach to those gods. Those gods are very much fallible, right? They're very similar to humans with human desires, human needs, human failings, right? And so those polytheistic religions oftentimes have a little bit more capability of relating to the everyday individual, which creates a different dynamic, right, between those polytheistic gods and the all omnipresent God, right? That monotheistic God. Um, so, right, we see the different relationships between these people, and we see how they might interact with their environments differently, right? If you believe in that animism, that connection to nature, your God is that tree. It might be all trees, right? It might be you might have that animal spirit, so you relate to that animal spirit, which means you want to protect that animal spirit, right? So that connection to nature might be greater, right? If you believe in that omnipresent monotheistic God, you might believe that everything is up to that God, right? Every decision, every move that you make has already been predetermined. So why have the consequences, right? If it's already been predetermined, then so what? So you might have different relationships to your environment based on your practices. And that's not to say that all of it is going to be same, because you can still have that reverence for nature by being a member of that monotheistic religion, right? Because that is also, you might also consider that to be a part of that grand design, that creation, and you're connected to it in that same way. So it's not to necessarily say that one is going to be more than the other, but it certainly can be. Okay, so I think this is an interesting question to ask, especially because this is a trend that we've been experiencing for the last 70 years, which means that there's a lot going on here. So in Western society, in Western culture, we're seeing this transition from monotheistic practices, believing in Christian religions, and it falling off, right? People have stopped practicing it. If we look at Great Britain, Australia, Canada, and the United States has the highest number of people currently who practice Christianity. All those other countries, they are not either, the majority of people are not practicing Christians. They might consider themselves to be Christian, but they don't actively go out and practice it on a regular basis. We're talking anywhere from like 30 to 45% of people who do engage in those practices, those rituals, every day or every week. A lot of people are moving away from that. In the United States, we can look at, if we go back to 1950, 90% of Americans considered themselves to be Christian, right? Since then, right, in the 2000s, that dropped down to 75%. And then as early as 2020, that had dropped down to 65%. That's a huge drop in numbers. That's 25% of people that have, left that that need or desire to be part of the Christian religion. So the question is why? Why are they doing that? What is it that has changed that has allowed people to move away from those practices? So what do you think? Right? What is it? And I'll give you a couple of ideas as to what could have caused it, and how things might continue, and sort of the implications. And I've talked about it throughout this this lecture on some of the reasons why. One of the reasons is again, globalism, right? The ability to and going back to Durkheim about this, is that people are moving away from their cultural and traditional families, right? Your parents might live in another state. Your brothers and sisters might live in a different town or a different state, right? People move around a lot to chase work, right? Where is the best job? Where are you going to go to school? That kind of stuff. It means that people move. And when people move, they get exposed to different ideas, but the old ideas are tougher to maintain, right? You have to find that new community. If you stay in your hometown with your parents and your other friends and family there, and you've got that church that's already established, and you continue to go there, well, then it gets maintained. But as soon as you leave that, all of those reinforcing factors start to diminish, right? So when we see sort of that urbanization that takes place, people moving from rural communities to urban communities, they're oftentimes not engaging in as many religious activities, or it changes over a couple of generations, right? Because you might maintain that religious practice, but your kids might not, because they might not see the value. They don't have all the reinforcement that you had growing up, right? So you've got that globalization, the urbanization process that can have that influence. You also have different values that are changing, right? If we go back to 50s and 60s, we start seeing, social order changing, civil rights. We start seeing concepts like free love and especially like the hippie, that era of the 1960s. We start seeing a shift in the LGBTQ community, people becoming more outspoken and more open about their sexuality and their concepts of gender. And we start seeing families that, say you come out as gay and then you get ostracized for doing that. You get kicked out of your family. Well, today, people are coming out, but they're not being kicked out. They might get kicked out of their church, right? Say you have a child that comes out as being lesbian or bi or trans, and you've been a member of this church, but all of a sudden this church says, well, you can't be a member of this church if your child is trans, right? Because our religion says this is not the right thing that you can do. Um, and so that creates a conflict, that conflict of interest. Who are you going to side with, your child, or are you going to side with your church? Well, we've seen how that split can go either way. The important fact here is that it's going either way, that people feel like they can leave their church to go with their child. And that means that there is, again, another conflict that is creating division within those religious practices. And so those are a couple of reasons, right, that people are leaving the church, right? Education is another one of those. When education has been focused on scientific learning, that separation between religious teaching and then scientific learning, and being exposed to both, people are choosing one or the other, right? But that is a new option, right? That sort of scientific learning, that secular learning, is becoming more and more approachable, and a lot of families are engaging in it, partially because it's public. That's how most kids learn, right? They have the capability of going to public school and learning that, and going to church and learning that. And because of all of these things, that religion is starting to drop out. It's not being carried over as much as people move around. It's not changing quickly enough to engage families and all types of families, however those families are organized, whether or not they're same-sex marriages or they're trans folks or whoever, right? They're not being engaged. They're not pulling in those people. They're oftentimes expelling those people. Those kinds of things, right? So what else? What else can you think of that might have an impact on these ideas of changing religion, of leaving religion, right? Even if we go back to, again, globalism, people are being exposed to other religions that better suit their needs. I know a number of Buddhists. I know a number of people who practice Baha'i, that are Muslim, that look at these different religions and say, I have access to this. I want to follow what best makes sense to me. And that's global communication, right? You can learn about those things and you have places to go to experience it. So that level of diversity is definitely having an impact on religious practice, especially when it comes to Christianity, um, as it sort of diminishes over time. And who knows what's going to happen in the future. Um, we can look at current trends and we can continue to see sort of this transition into fewer and fewer people believing. But then you see something like what Pope Francis did, right? And that's one of those things that could pull people back in, right? By saying, hey, your brother and sister, they deserve that seat at the table, even if they are gay, bi, lesbian, trans, whatever. They still deserve love, and if the church can accept that, right, it won't be expelling people; it will be bringing people back in. So, how is the church going to change and adapt? Can they change and adapt? Fascinating question. Okay. In conclusion to this lecture, right? Religion is a means to see and understand the world we live in, even if you don't believe in it. No matter what, religion has an influence. That's just it. Doesn't matter if you're atheist, agnostic, Buddhist, right? If you live in a country that is predominantly Christian, you're going to be influenced by a lot of those Christian values, even if you're non-practicing. And it's just because it's become a part of everyday culture, right? A lot of our morals and values are connected to those religious ideas, and so they get passed along, whether you like it or not. Um, so understanding, again, that it's a huge part of all of our lives, and understanding those impacts um, is very important. It often defines our norms and values, concerns, how we should behave, our sexual identities. All of these things, our connection to the afterlife, right? How do we get there? What are the rites of passage that we have to go through? What are the things that we have to do to maintain that relationship, right? It can be the foundation um, for control over a community, right? How should we behave? What are our rules? These are oftentimes the morals and ethics that a community will survive by. It can be the basis for war and peace, depending on the needs or desires of that community. A lot of times wars are fought over resources. Um, if we think about spirituality as a resource, then we can definitely count that as a part of that, right? Whether or not you're going to save more souls and send them to heaven, or send the heretics off to hell, that is a realistic resource, right? If you believe in sort of that spirituality. At the same time, if we look at the practical reasons why people do things, right? That religion can be that explanation as to why you go to war, but what you're really after are those natural resources. But it gives you that idea. Again, sort of thinking about um, that idea of going out and conquering the West, right? In the United States, we had this right to do this God-given right to go out and take the West and to colonize it. And that was religious reason, and it was enough of a reason to do some really inexplicable and in many ways heinous things to the people that were already living there. So we have to take all of those things into consideration. oftentimes there's an intermediary between yourself as a member of that religion to the supernatural itself, whether it's a god or multiple gods or the natural realm. There's an intermediary, be it that priest, that rabbi, that shaman, the imam, you know, any one of those folks becomes that intermediary, and they're the ones that control access to that supernatural. They control access to uh, the they grant wishes or favors. They grant admission to the afterlife, right? So there is oftentimes a lot of power connected to those individuals. We've talked about globalism and how much of an impact it's having on people and how people, excuse me, are moving from one place to another, bringing their religion with them. How urbanization is changing religious experience, right? And it can be a very, very powerful motivator for anyone to accomplish the things in life that they want to accomplish or believe they need to accomplish. Um, and it can sometimes be greater than family bonds, but family bonds are oftentimes the things that might break those religious practices. And then also how things change over generations, right? Especially when we're talking about globalism and urbanization. People move from rural communities that have very strong religious ideologies, go to an urban environment that might not have those same sort of strong connections to religious ideology, and then within a couple of generations, things drop off and change. So, you know, that can have a big impact on a religion and uh, that community. Okay, that's it. Um, yeah, we will see you all later. I will see you later. I won't see any of you. You guys are all just watching me. I apologize for that sometimes because I suspect it's sometimes interesting, sometimes boring. I can't help that. But what I can do is do it again. I will see you all later. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope your semester is going great. And if you have any issues, please reach out, let me know, and I'll help you if I can. Okay, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.